recognize the artist in the room. Marit Berg is the head of the department, and she produced this work right behind me. Melinda's not in the show, but she's going to be in a show coming up, and she's right over there. Karen Vanessa right here, and she did the one over there behind the desk, and then Christine Parent. This is some of the artists. It's their first time in the show, and there's a piece around the corner. And Brian Hughes went to town. He's got quite a few pieces made out of sugar over there that are melting as we speak. Okay. Bill Colby, right here. Everybody knows Bill Colby. He's got some pieces in the front. And Charles Burt. Okay. He's also new, and he's finishing his degree at Pierce. There's another artist from Pierce. I think Dave is coming, who's done that mannequin with the chocolate head. So thank you all for making new pieces for the show. I also wanted to say something about the artists in the community. I want to thank everybody for making new things, to create a dialogue on campus. And we had some comments on our bulletin that maybe the committee will address, that kind of speaks to the power of art, that artists provide inspiration for discussion of important issues, and that's why we're here today. So thank you very much. I also want to thank Joe Monroe for Center for Engagement and Learning for collaborating and helping get the press out about this show. I think it also, she works into its professional development. We've also had a few talks. Bruno gave a talk. We're going to have a talk on Friday at 1:30. Jimmy is the ceramics student who will talk about his work in the show, which is right on the pedestal there, the slave shackles.
And we have my
so anyway, thank you very much, and I think it's a great collaboration. Joe's also on the advisory committee. And then I'd also like to introduce Jody Matthews. She's working in the foundation, and she finished up her degree in integrative arts and humanities and science, and with a minor in global studies. And she spent a lot of time preparing interesting questions for the panelists. So thank you very much. And we have a reception at 4 o'clock, so just hang around afterwards.
Thank you, Jennifer and Joe. This is a great opportunity for not only TCC, but Tacoma. We're so fortunate to have this venue and this opportunity for art. That not everybody has this, and so we're pretty lucky. This is a great exhibition. I want to just go ahead and read what this is all about. The Tacoma Community Art Gallery hosts the Global Perspectives exhibition, and they did that in 2014. Area artists produce works of art about topics such as culture, labor, and poverty that encourage a dialogue about global issues. This exhibition, Sugar and Spice, is a continuation of that theme. This exhibition is an opportunity to consider the way trade of these commodities brought cultures into contact and conflict. We're dealing with this aftermath in today's world. So this is a really important thing for us to be looking at. And so what I'd like to do is I would like to introduce the different artists, and then I would like to introduce Bruno, who is on staff here. And so Wendy Fine, and she did the piece here, King Sugar. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm very, very sorry, that's true. I'm mistaken. And then Becky Fries. What pieces did you do? You did this history.
This photo montage, I guess you call it.
Okay, great. And then Bruno, would you like to explain why you're on this panel and what you do for TCC?
Okay, my name is Bruno Arzola, and I am the department head for the World Language Department. I teach Spanish here also, and I'm also helping with the creation of the Global Star Certificate at Tacoma Community College that we hope to bring online next year.
Great. So, Wendy, would you like to explain and kind of give us an overview of your art that you have showing here today?
Sure. I'm going to ask you just to turn around because that's where you can see it better. And you can stand up if you want. I'm going to just mess up the video, I think, by doing this. But I'm a teacher, so this is what I do. So if we can just have read that, get a sense of where this is from?
Nicaragua.
Somebody?
Nicaragua.
Central America,
Central America? Anybody else?
Nicaragua?
Nicaragua. I was there a couple summers ago. A friend of mine was in the Peace Corps in Nicaragua, and so I went down to visit, and I was fortunate enough to go to a Spanish school that was an eco-friendly Spanish school. So I got to be immersed in the community. And I spent time actually living and volunteering and teaching in the community. So I saw things from a different perspective. So a lot of my photography that I've taken around the world is from volunteer opportunities. And I do it to work with children, and I love to meet the people in the community and practice a little bit of Spanish. So what happens over in these pictures especially is from right near Masaya volcano. So if you're living next to a volcano that's active, what does that mean? And think in terms of this, the theme here, what would it mean?
Health issues.
Health issues, what else? You're living in the path of the volcano. Somebody else?
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty, what else?
Fertility is probably quite fertile right there with the volcanic soil.
So a lot of the soil is fertile, but it's only fertile for a couple crops, and it's pineapple and one other crop is all they can grow there. So poverty is huge there. So these kids go to school, a lot of them give them a hug and it's respiratory, you can hear them breathing, because it's a constant problem in the volcanic region. So we think of volcanic ash is rich soil, but in this case, they can grow one crop. And if there's a problem with the weather or floods, et cetera, that crop doesn't happen. So single crop economies are hard. So what happens is they often end up pushing carts and selling different things. And this is a woman from the village right next to it. She's probably 70, 80 years old. It's hard to tell because of their body's weather, much more because of the heat. And she's selling what?
Sugar.
Candy, lollipops. And what has happened in this region is Walmart has come into Nicaragua for cheap labor, and they go and do a lot of negotiation with farmers, and Walmart comes in with a different name. So when I was in Granada, which is one of the bigger cities, and it's got, when I was in Granada, there was a bigger store. It was Walmart with a different name. And people don't know that. And what has happened is Walmart has expanded to a lot of the Central American countries and taken jobs and away from a lot of the locals. And what has happened is they can sell things as they do here for cheaper prices. And what happens is it wipes out the small farms, it wipes out the small communities, the small businesses as well.
Which is actually not too much different than what happens here. Really.
Any other comments from the photos or from what you've heard? This is real stuff. And this is sugar and spice and the trades. This is what's happening.
Yeah, I have a question. Do they get a lot, they probably don't get a lot of rainfall, so their crops never really get damaged too much. And if they do, wouldn't Walmart be a nice place to import produce and stuff like that? So doesn't it kind of help them?
It could help them in some ways, but the problem with a lot of it is they offer low wages, they don't have health care, things like that. So it may be a more steady income. And some of them look at it and say, this is a steady way, I'm going to always be able to sell this or that to them. But they're so limited in what they can grow that it makes it really difficult too. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And if they would come in and be more equitable, it would be a really different
City
city.
roads, they'll never make money.
Do they produce enough pineapple for export?
No,
No.
most of the time not, no. And that's an expensive thing to export. Think of a pineapple, it's a very expensive thing to export. Other comments?
Are there local businesses that, or are there businesses in Nicaragua that are Nicaragua-based
There are some,
That
there are some.
that do export any?
They do, and
their products?
the big export is,
Probably sugar.
coffee. And so I've been to some coffee farms, and they're literally sorting out the coffee beans. You get the good ones, the ones that are sold down there, are what's left over. Any other comments or just impressions from the pictures that I've chosen?
When I was reading your bio, you were talking about, one of the things that really struck me was the children not being able to attend school because they have to help their families gather water on a daily basis. Could you kind of speak to that a little bit?
That happens in many places around the world, and I think it happens in Nicaragua, it happens in a lot of places. What happens is they're deprived of education, many of them, because they have to do family chores on the farm, etc. And what happens a lot of times is drought, and so they're having to walk maybe miles or kilometers to be able to access water sources. That takes hours and hours out of the day. So they're not just going to the tap and turning on water or turning on a hose. And that's what you really have to see there. And I've seen that all around the world. And the water that they often get is polluted, so that's another problem. I would also encourage you to go to water.org. It's Matt Lehman and a few others that are working on it, and you'll get some tremendous insights into the water issue. Any other comments?
The one photo of the man in the blue hat
Mm-hmm.
pushing those carts, I was particularly struck by the look of on his face, kind of a cross between determination and will I survive tomorrow? It's an interesting capture that you made there.
And that's so true so often. But what sells the quickest is the candy and the pop. Water is contaminated, so you see when you walk down the street, it is littered with plastic bottles and pop and wrappers, etc. And so that's what they're eating. They have a problem. Even the kids on the bottom photo are at the Panama school where I volunteered, and they look well dressed and healthy, but they wear those same clothes every day. They've worn those same clothes every day when I was there, and they're getting sugar-filled snacks. So that gets them to school, because that may be their only meal all day.
Only source of energy.
And they literally are, some of those kids have climbed the walls there.
You mentioned the water being polluted, right?
Yeah.
Did I hear that? And so is the pollution only from their own lack of septic
A lot of it is,
system, or
and
is it from volcano as well?
you get the volcanic ash mixed in, and the river runoffs, and people washing clothes at the river. You got to remember that river source is used for multiple sources. And so just as in India or in Africa and other places.
Yeah, and so there's no well.
Most of them don't
For
have
source.
wells. And that's what needs to start to happen, more wells. Any other comments? Can I just hear a couple words that evoke, just adjectives, a couple words from the photos? Anybody else? Anybody else? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, I really appreciate that. So Becky, we had a little discussion yesterday, and I thought your work was fascinating in the historical aspects, but could you give us a little bit more insight as to your work here?
Sure.
And the name of this work is Salt.
It's called salt. So it's not a sugar and it's not a spice, but it's one of the 5 flavors according to Chinese culture. You can do without the others, but you can't do without salt. And well, first of all, just in terms of documentary photography, I don't think of myself as a documentary photographer. I'm an artist, and I travel a lot, and I have a little snapshot camera. These are actually from 07, so they're already a little old. Probably the camera I used, usually it's pretty small, and it doesn't matter to me that it's a big, I don't like to travel around with a big fat camera that I have to worry about. Because once you take them to the computer and put them in Photoshop. You can dink around and do all kinds of weird stuff. And then I almost always draw back on top of them, so I would photograph them just in terms of process. You know, probably a lot of you download photographs into your computer and all of a sudden, and you look at this array and go, wow, look at that. Oh, I forgot about that, you know, and you start like maybe toggling them or renaming them or whatever. And that's pretty much, that's like treasure time. Let's see what I got. And, so out of this experience in Zigong, it's actually part of a museum. You can look this up on the internet. It's a Zigong Salt History Museum. And you go to this little town. It's not, there's no little town in China. There's always a million people that live there. But it's south of Chengdu, maybe 2-hour drive or so, in Sichuan province. And I was lucky enough for a number of times to go on a study tour to teach Chinese art with a group of adults from through a Freeman Foundation grant through PLU. So we would have other professors with us and other teachers, and one of the professors knew about this salt place because in Sichuan province, it's special salt because it comes from an underground lake of briny water, salt water. And centuries ago, in the 2nd century, people figured out how to tunnel down to this briny water with bamboo poles and suck the water up. And there's natural gas that would be released, and that would be released. And then they would, this is called open pan salt refining. So they actually heat it and boil it, and they all the liquid and brine evaporates away, and then they scrape these vats and get this really, really incredibly wonderful fine salt. And so there's a whole history of salt around the world, in China and in Europe too, and the whole as a commodity, it was taxed very heavily, and so it was a huge source of revenue for the various emperors and dynasties that came. They always got a lot of revenue from taxing salt. Anyway, when you go to Zigong and you go to the Salt Museum, the first thing you see is this gorgeous building that's very decorative, and it's got, you know, all the great architectural elements of dragons, carvings, and you think, wow, it's salt here? What? Well, it's the guild hall that all the very rich salt merchants had made so that they could get together like a men's club there and watch Chinese opera all afternoon. So that's what you see when you go there. But our colleague, when we were traveling there, knew about this place. If you go around back, they still have this one traditional salt making, open pan salt making facility, and you can go back there. And this guy is like working in these horrible, it was so hot and steamy. And if you come up close when you have a chance to look at it, this man is extremely thin and is working really hard, moving all this salt and putting it into these big conical shapes. And I thought, this is all for tourists? Because they certainly don't need to make salt that way anymore. They have much more modern ways of making salt. But from a historical point of view, it sort of it opens up the Pandora's box in a way of, wow, what was the whole history and culture and economics of salt? So that's the background for salt.
When we spoke on the phone, you were talking about how food is very important to you when you go out into different areas. Could you kind of touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, I bet food was important to you when you were traveling in Nicaragua too, and whenever I travel. And a lot of times I'm not anymore because my children are grown and don't live at home anymore, but I traveled a lot when I had children too. And when you're the mom, my husband would be busy with students or doing whatever, and I'd have to figure out how to feed the kids, you know. So you go to the market, figure out how people eat where you live, and we usually stayed long enough to, you know, live off the local economy and figure figure out. So it's just what I do. I always find the market, find out where the fresh food is, where's it coming from. I just got back from Trinidad. I spent the month of January in Trinidad and another PLU program, by the way. And we went to an old sugar refining factory that they're turning into a historical park. And, you know, all the spices and cocoa. So now I'm getting all involved in this whole cocoa movement from bean to bar, they call it. Young entrepreneurs making the cocoa and making chocolate bars to sell. And, you know, there's a whole economic piece. So I have all these photographs that I've dumped into my computer and I haven't had time to actually print them and do pieces with them yet. But hopefully that'll be coming next year.
That sounds great.
What's there?
You know, when I think about salt, I think about Gandhi and how important that was in his life and his, you know, trying to deal with the colonialism of India. And maybe you could speak a little to that. Did you feel like that was something that was a Chinese issue, or do you feel like it was more within the Chinese government that?
Well, some of it's practical. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm not really a Chinese historian, so I would misspeak probably about which dynasty
Right.
did which thing. But I mean, starting in the 2nd century BCE, so they were fighting over who was going to be taxed and who was going to control the salt production. Now you can do salt, you can refine salt from the sea just through natural evaporation, which was being done. But this salt in Zigong, and it was also in the south, and the capital of China used to be Xiamen, which is in the south. And so this salt was not only really, really high quality, but it was easy to transport by river. It's on a river, the Fuxi River. So all of those things come into play about who's gonna, and then when something becomes valuable and needed, you know, just like water, fresh water, you know, and so the Chinese emperors and rulers wanted to control that because they could make a lot of money. And so then they taxed the salt and the salt merchants rather than individual people. I think they made huge coffers full of money by, and then getting the merchants were the ones that shipped it down the river to the capital, and eventually for export too, because it was such wonderful salt. But then they could control the salt. If you live in a place that doesn't have salt naturally as a natural resource.
And salt is used in preserving, and
Right.
you know, it's very important in any kind of civilization or community.
So then it becomes a political thing if you the haves and have-nots. We have salt. We don't have salt. You can pay us for your salt.
For this particular one, did they have any extra leverage as far as its salt coming from a brine underground was more unique than other salts in the areas, and did they use that to their advantage?
Well, yeah, and I mean, China's a huge continent too.
Right.
So not every place had salt,
Right.
but every place wanted salt. So, and in this case, Sichuan province is very far from the ocean, thousands of miles to the west. So to find an underground lake of brine was extremely valuable. It's like gold.
Were the properties of the salt itself
Were-
unique from other salt?
Oh, right. It's very fine. It's very, and when it's refined this way,
And
it's
it-
really, really high quality salt.
So, do you know chemically then, did it not contain the heavier metals in the salts?
No.
Yeah, I was just curious.
I just found it interesting that this guy, I mostly found it interesting that they had set up or reconstructed this traditional open pan refining facility and that this man worked there when it's really just there for tourists to see.
Yeah. Interesting.
You know, I mean, that's a really great Disney character. He was working really hard. And I doubt that he was really well paid, but I don't know. I don't know what the circumstances of his labor are. Yeah. It's interesting to me.
Does anybody have any more comments or questions about this work I'd like to share? Yes, Mara.
Something that came to mind, I know I'm familiar with the African cultures make beautiful objects to hold the salt. Did you come across anything in your travels that were dedicated to holding salt, artistic?
They have a display of vessels like that inside the fancy museum on the front part in the old guild hall. So yeah, that would be, and of course ceramic containers have been part of the Chinese tradition for centuries and centuries. So yeah, but in other places, I haven't really paid that much attention to containers that would be specifically for salt. I mean, maybe somebody here collects salt shakers. Like salt and pepper shakers.
It is one of the five elements.
It is one of the
Chinese culture, and it's food. It's
Right. I have a glass salt and pepper shaker that's glass in the shape of a dachshund.
I don't think they've become like.
Somebody gave me as a gift. Half of it's salt and half of it's pepper. Right?
My mother collected salt and pepper shakers, and she had over 150.
See?
Which is now being held by my sister. They didn't come to me.
Oh. And does she have them in vitrines all around
Well,
the
she
room?
has them under glass.
Yeah.
I mean, she had them under glass, and my sister now, her husband built a place for them on shelves under glass.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to travel anywhere. I think about it for a minute. Have you gone anywhere where there isn't salt in your food already or on the table?
It's like buying a pair for her in Australia, and then, of course, not really paying any attention, but after I bought them, we examined them, and they were made in Japan. Or China, whatever. No, I think they were Japan.
Etymologically, you have to understand, for example, your English word salary comes from the word salt, because that's how Roman soldiers were paid, with salt.
Mm-hmm.
So it did have a value as a food preservative, not only as a flavor enhancer. So.
It's very important in most cultures to have that preservative quality. Also, if you ever go online to look at different kinds of salt, there's thousands of different kinds of salt, and they come in all different kinds of flakes and all different kinds of gradation. And it's one of those things that I like when I cook. I have several different salts, and I think it's fascinating. And I love bringing up the salt salvers, because salt salvers are very, very much in vogue in the Victorian era, which was the big colonial time in England, and how they collected salvers from all over the world. And if you ever go to the V&A museum in London, there's a whole room dedicated to those kinds of containers. It's amazing.
Well, there were some very well-known large salt refining places in Great Britain and Germany
Yes,
as well.
definitely.
Yes, wasn't that would be part of the
Yes.
history?
Any more questions about salt, or this wonderful artist that captured the history of salt for us in China? So, Bruno, what do you think of what you've heard today, and is there anything that you feel is, that strikes you as being significant or important, and something that we can use here at TCC or the community at large could benefit as they walk away from this event?
I think there's several things that strike a note with me within my classes, for example. As I teach a foreign language, I try to incorporate within my teaching culture, connections, communities, and other things that pertain not only to language itself, but they are also part of the language. Food is a very good example of a culture, and I'm looking, for example, at Alicia's display over there, the jewelry with the spices in them. And for example, many years ago, European food was not what it is today. European food used to be, after the Dark Ages, very flavorful, actually. because it was the way that you display your wealth. If you were able to afford spices that were brought from faraway lands over many months, that meant that you could eat well or eat spicy food. And also, I mean, think about what you had today for dinner or for breakfast. Where did the ingredients come from? Historically, where do they come from? Leche is Italian. What would be something classic Italian? A pasta. And if you start to deconstruct that dish, you start to see connections and travels and peoples. So, for example, your noodles are Chinese. Think of Marco Polo. Your tomatoes are American. If you like chicken with your pasta or something like that, well, chickens were domesticated in India. So, to me, food is a wonderful reflection of people, where they come from, where they have been, and to a certain extent to where we're going. And that's something I try to convey my students in my classroom. That's certainly something that we hope to be able to do with our upcoming Global Star Certificate. Give our students a global vision, not just this little microcosmos where we live in Western Washington. See that there is another world out there. So, I don't know.
That's great, thank you. Does anybody have any comments about what Bruno said? Yes.
Oh, here we have Alice.
He was talking about your piece. What about it?
It looks delicious, Alice.
It smelled, that was my only concern, the fact that, I mean, I want it obviously protected by the case, but you can't smell the spices, which you can if you're wearing them, which I thought was pretty a good idea.
I'm afraid we're gonna break the jar and get it.
There's no jar. You can just, you get the jewelry, you get the spices as well.
Are there any questions for any of the panelists right now that you've thought of while we've been talking?
I was particularly moved by your statement of deconstruct the meal
Mm-hmm.
and all the connections that it's composed of. That was interesting to hear. I never really thought of it that way.
We can pick almost any culture and start looking at the connections. For example, I was born and raised in Mexico, and a classic meal will be, for example, a classic dessert, a flan, which is a custard. And, it started back in the Roman days, and it was a savory dish. And now, did you know that there's some sort of flan, a little custard in England? It's usually on a pie crust, and that's because the Romans were there too. But then you have other people like the Moors that invaded Spain, who brought with them sugar, and then you have the Spanish who invaded America and brought all this stuff, and then the America has vanilla to add to the flavor. So everybody's giving their little token here and there. And that's a little bit romantic because, we can think about all the undercurrents that went with invasions. In a more pragmatic way, to me, making those connections are a little more important. And they were very important to me back in 2003 to 2004, in which I was deployed as a U.S. soldier in Afghanistan. And the ability, I can honestly tell you that the ability to make connections with other people kept me safe. And make a deployment somewhat enjoyable.
On a relative scale.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it is important. It's very, very important.
I maintain every culture has a burrito. That's what
Yeah.
I maintain.
I mean, you go
Think
to
about it.
yeah, you go to Vietnam. They have the little spring rolls.
Yeah.
You have crepes in Europe. You have
Mm-hmm.
You have variations of that same thing. You have calzones in Italy. In Mexico, we have in Argentina, Mexico, Spain, we have empanadas. Turnovers.
It's like a burrito.
Yeah. So yeah,
I'm getting hungry.
they're all variations on the same thing. Yeah.
Any more comments? This has been really great. I think we've gone from wonderful artwork and wonderful photographs that have really gotten us thinking about food and the cultures that the food comes from, and also the idea that that these cultures have been affected by basically the tag end of colonialism. When we look at Walmart, it's basically just colonialism in this day and age. So we see those influences, but it's really nice for you to bring in that that we are truly a global community when we look at it that way. Are there any more questions or any comments that you'd like to make before I have a few comments of my own?
I would just like to very quickly read a paragraph that one of my students, this is hot off the press, literally. I bring my students to the art gallery every quarter as part of my English Adult Basic Ed class. And they walked around before you got here at about 12:30, and they walked around. Most of my students have never been to an art gallery, and they have never been to the one on campus. So coming to the art gallery and coming to see such a poignant set of art exhibit was really, really important. So this is from one of my students. He's getting his high school diploma here at Tacoma Community College because he dropped out of high school, and this is what he wrote. The Sugar and Spice exhibit was a powerful experience for me. For example, the Jamaica white gold piece really was poignant and deep. This piece was about the British slaves and plantation owners during the 1800s that grew rich from the harvest of sugarcane. The thing that struck me was the British rich slave owner was bathing in a sugary teapot and had a whip in his hand with blood and sugar all around. This assignment showed me how easy and powerful it can be to represent an idea or thought through art. So bringing students in is such an important way to making these same connections. So this just happened. This is literally hot off the press, and every student got a different perspective. And I have students from all around the world. I have students from 18 to 70 in my classes. So they all got a different part of it. But just coming to an art gallery is something that maybe many of us have done throughout our lifetime. But for my students, this was a first art gallery for 75% of them.
We are extremely fortunate to have this on campus. We are really fortunate. If there are no more comments, I have a couple of things that came off the web that I'd like to kind of delve into, and I'd like to get the perspective from the panelists. There were some comments that came through the website, and one of them is about King Sugar. The featured image with the ladder of people of color being stepped, climbed on by white people caused a plethora of visceral reactions. I look forward to hearing the story behind this so I'm not left to my own judgment perception. I would like to kind of get the panelists' view of that piece and maybe some input from the audience. When they hear that, what are your perceptions about this piece, and what can we take away from looking at that piece and delving into that piece?
Well, from a personal perspective, okay, again, I was born in Mexico. I came here to the States, and I did landscaping, roofing, and all that stuff before I was able to go to school. I think to a certain point, it's a little bit of a choice. Do we, on either side of the stick that you are, you can be nice to other people, you can, or you don't have to. And remember, you can pick your choices, but you can't pick the repercussions of your choices. And also, that also speaks to me about the ability to rise up from those steps and stop being just a stepping stone on someone else's foot. So choices to me are very important.
Yeah, it struck kind of along those same lines. It struck me that the different colors, all one might presume were slaves, but from different countries, not all just Africa, and they're all face down. So they're using them as their foundation and stepping stones, showing that without them they could never get to the top in the first place. But by not looking at them, they totally deny their worth as an individual step, only as a means to get to where they're going. So I thought that was particularly poignant about them all facing down. You know, the old adage, you know, nice guys get walked on, or all those sayings that go with that piece. But not one of them is looking down, and not one of there's no contact.
Yeah.
So,
Think about the rhetoric today, political rhetoric today, and it's horrible. And it's really, really easy to make comments without knowing the repercussions. I mean, a very simplistic comment that I have heard before is, well, you need to send everyone back to their country. Yeah.
Back to Native Americans.
Yeah. But even if you,
that doesn't apply to us.
yeah, no, not to us. But you know, who's going to pick your apples in Eastern Washington?
Exactly.
And we had a shortage of pickers.
So who's going to fix your burger next time you go through a drive-through? It's a very simplistic way to put things without looking at the repercussions of what if that would happen.
I thought it was fascinating. And maybe I'm wrong because maybe I didn't see, I didn't really notice as well as I should, but it looks like there's different types of money from different countries.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that was interesting and very poignant because, you know, one country can rely on another country, can rely on another country, and then, you know, the kind of the top guy gets it. And he's facing, like he's gonna go back down those stairs. It's gonna be a constant kind of,
Yeah, and the same issues that we deal with here in the States can be felt globally. I mean, you speak to Canadians, for example, and when they make jokes about Canadians, it's the newfies who get the wrong end of the stick.
Mm-hmm.
We think about India, so far away. You know, the caste system is so wrong. It's not illegal, but still going on. But you know, there's still a little bit of caste system here in the States. They opened a Walmart here in Lakewood, a few years ago now. But I remember a comment that was published in the local paper. It says, "Well, here in University Place, we're Nordstrom people. We're not Walmart people." And
it's full, isn't it?
And it kind of stuck a note to me, like, oh, really? Really? So there is a little caste system, a little bit of class system here in the States. So we don't have to go really far away to see global issues in our doorstep.
I'd love to hear from more of the audience.
Sure.
More of the community.
Okay, so I mean, what I really like about that piece is that the bodies are objectified, which you mentioned, and they're also part of the structure. It's like it is a structure, and so all of the figures. I mean, you have the white figures, but the others are part. It shows something that maybe will engage people in a conversation about structures as well, because they're almost built into that foundation for people to get where they are, and talks about systems, not just individuals.
Maybe the dependency upon each other. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't see interdependency though,
No.
in that, yeah.
But it strikes me that they're male figures as well. I mean, I perceive them as male figures. So. Anyway, I'm not going to read the next comment. I don't think it has.
It's out there.
Yeah, it's out in public.
For us to see. You know
and
what I thought was funny was that each of those underneath, and I was going to ask for Rachel, but they all say no longer an employee.
That's just the glitch in the portal.
Oh, it's a glitch in the portal. I was like, wow. That was interesting because there were 3 rather interesting comments, and right under it said no longer employee.
Well, and they were all focused on this piece because that was the piece that was displayed on there.
That caused people to respond.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was really fascinating.
There was only 2 on there, so, yeah.
Well, I think we've we've really had some interesting comments and conversation. I really appreciate the artists for coming and showing their work. It's fantastic that we've had these very thought-inspiring pieces of work that have raised some really interesting issues. I'm hungry now. Thanks, Bruno. I started thinking, going past flan. I was in my mind going past the flan into creme brulee, and it was really getting to me. So, if there's any more comments, we'd like to take them. But if not, I think we're about done for today. And really appreciate this great turnout. It's wonderful to see everyone here. So thank you so much for participating.